very, very early on the Wednesday morning between the death and the funeral. And I just sat down and wrote it, and it took about an hour and a half and just came pouring out, really. Actually, it's interesting. Sounds rather sort of bizarre, but I did go to Diana's coffin the day after I'd written it, and I read it to her in there, and I did sort of feel a sort of positive energy come through that somehow she approved of what I was going to say.
The night before the world watched the most viewed funeral of the 20th century, Charles Spencer walked, entirely alone, toward the coffin holding his sister. In his hand was a eulogy he had only just finished writing hours earlier. He unfolded the pages and he read them aloud. No audience, no cameras, no microphones, just Diana. Spencer has said this himself, that the day after he wrote it, he came to her and spoke every single word. Sit with that image for a moment. A brother privately rehearsing what would become the most dangerous speech in modern royal history to the one listener who would never hear a syllable of it. Because almost 30 years on, that very same man stared down at a polished documentary proposal stamped with the names Netflix, Prince Harry, and Meghan Markle, and he answered the whole thing with 4 short words. Is this a joke? 4 words. That is all he needed to blow the Sussex media operation apart. And tonight, I am going to walk you through exactly why those 4 words may prove more crippling to Harry and Meghan than anything King Charles or Prince William has ever done to them. Here is my promise, and you know I keep my promises. By the time this video ends, you will walk away with 3 answers. First, what was actually inside that pitch? The particular ask that made Diana's brother physically recoil. Because once you hear what they were requesting, the diaries, the home reels, the estate itself, his fury will make perfect sense. Second, the secret that unlocks the whole man. A private guilt Charles Spencer has reportedly carried since the 1990s. The wound that shaped him into the fiercest gatekeeper in Britain, and the reason this specific proposal felt to him like history preparing a second act. And third, the quiet letter he is said to have written after all of it, not to Harry, not to Meghan, but to Prince William. A letter that royal insiders describe as calculation, not sentiment, and one that may quietly redraw the front lines of this entire family war. 3 threads. I will tie off every one of them before we finish, in that order. That is the deal between us. But none of this fits together until you understand who Charles Spencer really is. Because the man has kept himself so far in the shadows that most of the public has genuinely lost track of his stature. Charles Spencer is 62 years old, the youngest brother of the late Diana, Princess of Wales, and the 9th Earl Spencer, at the head of a family that has held both its land and its name for 500 years. And if you remember him for anything, you remember him for a single afternoon in September of 1997, standing inside Westminster Abbey, in front of a viewing audience of around 2 billion souls, delivering a eulogy that did something no one had ever attempted before at a royal event. He confronted the royal family directly, in the very same room, with the sovereign's mother and the future king sitting only feet away. On behalf of what he called Diana's blood family, he pledged that her sons would be raised with warmth and imagination, not smothered by icy royal formality. He pledged that he would protect William and Harry from the same torment that had chased his sister to her final moments in a Paris tunnel. What people remember is the applause rolling in from the streets outside like a change of weather. What they forget is that the speech was not, in truth, a eulogy. It was a vow. And Charles Spencer has spent every year since then keeping it, silently and deliberately. Start with the burial itself, because this is the opening move on the board, and hardly anyone reads it correctly. The world had assumed Diana would be laid to rest among royalty, tucked into a royal vault, on royal terms, with the palace dictating where and how it would happen. Nothing could be further from the reality of what took place. Diana was buried at Althorp, the Spencer estate in Northamptonshire, the house where she was raised, where she rode her horses, where she grew into the woman the world eventually fell in love with. On land her family has held for 5 centuries. Peel away the softness, and the truth is stark. Her brother refused to let the institution keep her, even after death. The royal family were given the funeral. The Spencers kept Diana. From that afternoon onward, anyone who wanted the private Diana, the real one, the letters and the film reels and the bedroom she grew up in, had to go through one single man. And that man had already stood before 2 billion people and made his feelings about the institution making the request perfectly clear. So there is your gatekeeper. And before we move any further, try a small thought experiment with me because it will sharpen everything that follows. Picture Diana's legacy as an enormous museum. The world already owns the postcards, the gowns, the headlines, the famous photographs, the clips replayed until they have worn thin. Anyone can print those, and heaven knows everyone has. But the originals, the handwritten pages, the unedited family footage, the room where she actually lived, the ground where she actually rests, all of that is held inside one private collection, curated by one man, who alone decides what leaves the building and what remains behind lock and key. Every Diana documentary you have ever sat through was assembled out of postcards. The curator has never once loaned out the originals. So ask yourself, honestly, what would it take for him to unlock that collection for the very first time? What depth of trust? What purity of intent? What guarantee that his sister's memory would be honored rather than spent? Hold your answer in mind. Then look at who came knocking and what they were asking for, and judge for yourself whether they were ever really in the running. Now watch who came walking up that driveway. It began, as these things always do, with something small and shiny and seemingly harmless: jewelry. At the evening reception of the royal wedding in 2018, Meghan Markle arrived wearing Diana's aquamarine ring, that enormous pale blue stone the world identified in an instant. And in fairness, in that first moment, it likely felt rather touching from where Charles Spencer was standing. Someone new, someone his nephew clearly adored, choosing to bring a piece of Diana with her into her wedding night. It felt like remembrance. It may even have felt like family. Then came the butterfly earrings, then the Cartier tank watch, then the gold bracelets. One by one, appearance by appearance, each item once belonging to Diana appeared on Meghan at precisely those events where photography was not just probable, but a certainty. Now, let me be fair, because fairness matters on this channel. Nobody can prove those intentions were anything other than sincere, and grief does strange and tender things inside families. But a pattern is still a pattern, and the public spotted this one very quickly. Somehow, every headline-grade Meghan appearance arrived with a Diana piece attached, like a maker's mark stamped into the metal of the occasion. Once is a tribute, twice is a habit. Every single time is a strategy, and you do not need a palace insider to see it. You only need eyes. Keep that word strategy tucked away, because the jewelry was only the overture, and what came next is where a brother's warm feeling reportedly began to cool into something much harder. March of 2021, the Oprah interview. You remember it. The whole planet remembers it. But I want you to remember it the way Charles Spencer reportedly watched it, sitting alone at Althorp. Critics pulled that broadcast apart, frame by frame, in the days afterward, and what they uncovered was not accidental staging. The lighting, low and golden. The setting, soft, close, confessional. The theme, a young woman silenced by an institution indifferent to her mental health. Her pleas for help brushed aside. Isolated within a hostile system with no exit left except the one that leads to the public. Any royal watcher worth their salt felt the chill of recognition immediately, because that is almost beat for beat the architecture of Diana's 1995 Panorama interview. The broadcast Diana gave because the palace had quietly locked every other door on her. The camera angles rhymed, the grammar of victimhood rhymed, the casting rhymed. One woman, one sympathetic interviewer, one faceless institution. Watching from the very house where his sister had grown up, Charles Spencer reportedly did not experience that hour as an act of tribute. And honestly, once you learn what you are about to learn in a few minutes about his history with Panorama, how could he? Run the rhyme test yourself, element for element. In 1995, a royal wife, isolated, describing an institution deaf to her suffering. In 2021, a royal wife, isolated, describing an institution deaf to her suffering. In 1995, the palace had closed every door, so she went over its head, straight to the public, through a single trusted interviewer. In 2021, identical. In 1995, hushed lighting, a confessional stillness, the atmosphere of secrets finally spilling. In 2021, identical. The one variable that shifted is the most revealing of them all. Diana gave her interview from inside the system, with everything on the line and no visible way out. The 2021 version was filmed from a villa in California after the exit, with a production apparatus already in place. The original was a cry for help. The remake, whatever else you make of it, was a launch. Then came the Netflix productions, the documentary series, the confessional pieces to camera, and along with them, a story built to travel. A couple driven out, hunted across continents by the very same establishment and the very same press pack that destroyed Diana. The implication was never subtle. It said, what happened to her is happening again, the same machine, a new generation, and this time the heroine escaped. As storytelling, I will grant you, it is powerful. As a business model, it is genius. But for the man who had watched his sister's real anguish get harvested in real time by media people who never cared whether she made it out, this began to look horribly familiar. The earrings had felt like remembrance. This felt like a repeat performance. And somewhere along those years, I suspect, the warm feeling died completely. Let me give you my framework for what was actually going on here, because I approach this from an angle most royal coverage never bothers to explore. Think of it as brand licensing. Take the emotion out and study the assets. Once Harry and Meghan stepped back from royal duties and surrendered the use of their HRH styles, they had to sustain themselves on something. What they had left was fame with a shelf life, and one asset more bankable than every other combined. Diana. Her face. Her mythology. Her martyrdom. In pure commercial terms, the Sussexes had been trading on a brand they were operating without a license, because the actual licensor, the keeper of the archive, the manager of the estate, the owner of the originals, was a 62-year-old man in Northamptonshire whom nobody had ever thought to consult. Every ring worn, every panorama echo, every hunted like Diana framing was another unauthorized withdrawal from the Diana account. And here is the awkward thing about unauthorized withdrawals. They function beautifully, right up until the moment you actually need the bank manager to sign off on a loan. Hold on to that, because we are getting to it. In early 2026, the Sussex operation slammed into a wall. The Spotify arrangement had already imploded. The lifestyle brand launched as American Riviera Orchard was failing to catch fire the way they had hoped. The entire California project needed something huge, something big enough to justify the Netflix relationship and to remind the world, loudly, why Harry and Meghan still mattered. And then, somewhere in a development meeting, someone put forward the idea. A grand anniversary documentary for 2027. Diana. 30 years after the tunnel in Paris. 3 decades of grief. 3 decades of unanswered questions. A sweeping, cinematic, definitive Diana film, fronted by her own son. On paper, it was flawless. Netflix reportedly loved it on impact and stood ready to throw serious resources behind it. But there was one particular angle that made the pitch truly irresistible to the people selling it. And this is the angle you need to sit with. They reportedly wanted to draw a hard, explicit line between Diana's battle with the establishment and Meghan's battle with those same forces. They wanted to position Meghan Markle as the modern continuation of Diana's story. The 21st century incarnation of the woman who refused to be silenced. Diana's halo, formally handed over. Bold, certainly, wildly ambitious. And it carried one catastrophic, structural, unfixable flaw. They needed Charles Spencer to make it happen. Because here is what the project reportedly required, and listen closely, because this list is the answer to the first thread I opened at the top of this video. They wanted Althorp itself for the backdrop. The childhood home, the lake, the island where she rests. They wanted the private family archives. They reportedly wanted access to Diana's personal handwritten diaries. They wanted home movies never once shown publicly. The unguarded footage. The real private Diana that nobody outside the Spencer family has ever laid hands on. Without those elements, this would simply be another history documentary, cobbled together from the same recycled news clips as every other one. With them, it would be the definitive Diana film of the century, and there is precisely one living person who controls every single item on that list. So Netflix and the Sussex team brought the proposal to Charles Spencer, and by every account, they were genuinely convinced he would say yes on the spot. And you can see their reasoning. From the outside, it looks like a colossal cinematic tribute, a love letter with a streaming budget attached. Exactly the sort of project a devoted brother, guarding his sister's memory, ought to be leaping at. But that is not what Charles Spencer saw when he read the document. He saw the role Meghan had been cast to play. He saw where the halo was being quietly relocated. And the moment he grasped the underlying architecture of the thing, who it truly served, and what it truly sold, he delivered the reply that has now passed into royal folklore. Is this a joke? When this specific man calls your project a joke, the word carries the weight of 3 decades. Almost no one alive holds more moral authority over Diana's legacy than the brother who has stood guard over it since the day they carried her out to the island. And just like that, the people who had built an entire documentary around Diana's legacy discovered they had no Diana to build it around. No house, no diaries, no film reels, no license. Now for the second thread, the one I have been holding back, because this is the piece of the story that transforms Charles Spencer from a stubborn aristocrat into something much more human and much more immovable. Why is this man so absolute? Why does the archive remain sealed against every offer, every budget, every nephew? The answer, according to long-standing accounts, is guilt. A very particular guilt that has reportedly shaped everything he has done since 1997. The story runs like this. It was reportedly Charles Spencer himself who first put his sister in touch with the journalist behind the Panorama interview, Martin Bashir. The same interview the world now knows was secured through forged documents and calculated psychological manipulation. Picture the mechanics of it. Diana, in the mid-1990s, was isolated, frightened, in genuine pain, and someone arrived carrying fabricated paperwork designed to persuade her that the people around her were betraying her, that she could trust nobody, that her only safe move left was to sit down in front of a camera and bleed for the nation. Her vulnerability was not a side effect of that broadcast. Her vulnerability was the product. And her younger brother, by these accounts, had unknowingly held the door open. When the full truth about how that interview had been engineered finally came to light years afterward, it reportedly hit Charles Spencer like an avalanche, because it meant he had played a role, however innocent, however unintended, in one of the deepest exploitations of his sister's suffering during her lifetime. Think about what that does to a person. You spend your life believing you are your sister's protector, and then you discover that the single most damaging media event of her life had walked through a door that you personally opened. Every year since, by every account, has been an act of atonement. The sealed diaries, the unseen home movies, the refusals, decade after decade, to let anyone monetize either the island or the archive. He has been making sure, with the single-minded focus of a man performing penance, that nothing resembling Panorama can ever happen to Diana again, not even in death. And in doing so, he has quietly achieved something extraordinary, something almost no famous figure of the modern era has been granted. He has preserved Diana's mystery. There is a private Diana the world has never consumed, and she exists only because one man keeps saying no. So now, run the tape again, and this time, put yourself in his seat. You are Charles Spencer. You have spent nearly 30 years atoning for one introduction. You have turned down every network, every publisher, every offer, because you saw with your own eyes what happened the one time the gate stood open. And now a courier drops off a proposal that wants the diaries your sister wrote in her own hand. The home movies of her as a young girl on the lawns of Althorp. The island where you buried her. Every last piece of it. All to prop up a story that ends not with Diana, but with Meghan Markle wearing her crown. You already know the financial desperation driving the pitch. You know that their debut documentary about royal wounds was the platform's biggest ever opening, so you can calculate to the decimal point exactly what your sister's private pain is worth to these people. What do you say? Honestly, what would any brother say? A proposal lands on his desk. Soft lighting and confessional framing. The Panorama playbook rebuilt inside Oprah's villa. A narrative that mines his sister's suffering to anoint a successor. a request for the diaries, the home movies, the most intimate remains of the most exploited woman of her era, all to keep a streaming platform's content pipeline full at the exact moment, as we are about to see, when the people pitching it were financially desperate. Of course he said what he said. Honestly, the only surprise is that he stopped at 4 words. Now to the desperation. Because to understand why this documentary mattered so much to Montecito, you have to look at the state of the Sussex media empire in early 2026. And I will warn you now, it is not a flattering picture. Everyone knows about the $100 million Netflix deal, the 5-year arrangement that funded the California dream. And everyone now knows it has been hanging by a thread. The flagship, intended to stabilize the operation, was the lifestyle series With Love, Meghan. Instead, it became the iceberg. Within 24 hours of the show going live on Netflix, the verdicts arrived thick, fast, and merciless. Let me read you the scoreboard, because the scoreboard is the story. The Evening Standard in London handed it 4 stars and still could not resist a swipe on the way out the door. The Times gave it 2 stars and described it, in a phrase I honestly cherish, as surreally dull. The Daily Telegraph also landed at 2 stars and dismissed the program as an exercise in narcissism packed with extravagant brunches, celebrity friends, and business plugs. And then there is The Guardian, and this one deserves your attention, because The Guardian is no royalist rag. This is a newspaper that has long argued for abolishing the monarchy altogether, and has repeatedly published pieces condemning the treatment of Meghan. If any paper in British print was primed to adore this show, it was them. They gave it 1 star and called it toe-curlingly unlovable television. One of their writers went even further and suggested it might be the final thing Meghan ever makes for Netflix. Even the television editor at Hello, the gentlest publication in the kingdom, admitted she could not work out who the show was for. When the spectrum of British media runs from Republican broadsheet to Royal Fan Weekly, and every last one of them lands on the same wince, that is not a review problem. That is a product problem. And here is the detail most coverage skated past, the one I find genuinely fascinating. The harshest verdict of all did not arrive from the so-called royalist press. It arrived from The Guardian, the paper most ideologically sympathetic to Meghan's grievances against the institution, the paper that would happily see the whole monarchy dissolved. Think about what that means. Her natural allies, the very people primed to cheer anything that weakens the crown, sat through her show and reached for 1 star. When your enemies pan you, that is Tuesday. When your friends pan you, that is a verdict. And the underlying pattern is worse than any single review. The couple's debut documentary series, Harry and Meghan, the one where they unpacked their struggles with royal life, remains the most watched debut in the platform's history. That fact is the skeleton key to this entire saga, so hang on to it. Their other projects, Heart of Invictus and Polo, met a chilly critical reception. With Love, Meghan, pitched as a fresh, approachable glimpse into their California life, resonated even less. Set those facts down side by side, and the audience's message could not be louder if they had chartered a plane to spell it across the sky. The world is not interested in Meghan's brunches. The world is interested in royal wounds. The only Sussex product that has ever truly sold is proximity to the crown and to Diana. Which is exactly why, when the brunch economy collapsed, the pitch deck reached for the deepest royal wound of them all. According to Fox News, industry experts noted the 5-year, $100 million arrangement was set to expire in 2025. A second season of With Love, Meghan has already been filmed and is scheduled to premiere this autumn. But beyond that, the fog rolls in. Following the tepid reception, the streaming giant has reportedly decided against renewing the deal, much to Meghan's chagrin. Other reports insist she remains in talks for some form of renewal. So let us be exact and say the marriage between Montecito and Netflix is, at minimum, on life support. The royal commentator Ian Pelham Turner put it plainly. Losing Netflix would be a major blow for the couple. And according to media watchers, she desperately needs to get back on her feet or surrender the only realistic hope she has of remaining in the spotlight. Picture the situation from inside that Montecito office for a moment, because the stakes are brutally simple. A second season, already filmed, already paid for, sails toward an autumn premiere, while the deal that commissioned it lies expiring on the table. Every review of Season 1 becomes a piece of evidence in the renewal file, Every cultural shrug gets counted. If Season 2 lands the way Season 1 did, there is no Season 3, no pipeline, no platform. And the entire California project loses the engine that funds it. That is the cliff edge on which the Diana documentary pitch was standing. It was never one project among many. It was the project. The one card in the deck guaranteed to draw a global audience, because it was the one card printed with the only royal story bigger than their own exit. And the man at Althorp tore it up with 4 words. Put all of that together, and the 2027 Diana documentary stops looking like a passion project and starts looking like exactly what I believe it was, a rescue flare. The question now is whether the Sussexes can find a workaround. And that question leads somewhere genuinely unexpected. Because here is the third thread, the letter. And this is where the story stops being about a documentary and starts being about the future of the monarchy itself. Charles Spencer, by all accounts, did not make this decision in a vacuum, and sources close to the palace have been quietly describing a relationship that most royal watchers have been sleeping on completely. The understanding between Diana's brother and Diana's eldest son. It is no secret that Prince William has been privately seething for years over the commercialization of his mother's image. But understand William's cage. He is the future king, which means every action he takes triggers consequences. He cannot publicly block his own brother's media projects without manufacturing a global headline about palace censorship and royal family warfare. And when the palace blocks something, it always reads as the establishment protecting itself. But when Diana's own brother, the man who stood inside Westminster Abbey and vowed before 2 billion people that he would protect her sons, calls a project a joke, that is not institutional control. That is family honor. Nobody can spin it, because there is no institution left to blame. Do you see the elegance of it? The one man free to say no is the one man whose no cannot be weaponized against anyone. William never had to lift a finger, and I would gently suggest to you that this is not a coincidence so much as an alignment. 2 guardians of the same memory arriving at the same wall from different sides. There is a name for this in international affairs, and the parallel is worth 30 seconds of your time. When 2 governments cannot speak to each other without losing face, the message travels through a back channel, a private citizen, an elder statesman, someone with standing on both sides and a uniform on neither. The envoy can say the unsayable precisely because he holds no office, and if the message lands badly, no government falls. That is exactly the role Charles Spencer now occupies inside this family war. He has standing with the public, blood ties to both princes, moral title over Diana's memory, and no constitutional position whatsoever. The palace cannot tell Netflix no without a scandal. William cannot tell Harry no without a headline. But the Earl in Northamptonshire can tell everyone no in 4 words over breakfast. And the only institution that takes the hit is Montecito. Once you see him as the back channel, the next development stops being surprising and starts being inevitable. And then reportedly came the move nobody saw coming. In a discreet but remarkable step, Charles Spencer is said to have written directly to Prince William, urging him to publicly address the deepening crisis between Prince Harry and the royal family. And before anyone mistakes this for peacemaking, let me kill that idea now. According to insiders, this plea is not about emotional reconciliation. It is about strategy, stability, and protecting the global standing of the British monarchy. The reported contents are brutal in their clarity. The silence cannot continue. The crown must reclaim its strength. Harry, in the eyes of the world's media, has become a symbol of weakness, no longer viewed as the man he was raised to be, the soldier, the prince, the statesman, but as a shadow of himself, emotionally fragile, reactive, and consumed by the story of his wife. Spencer reportedly warned that Harry's own choices have allowed the press to redefine him, not as a royal, but as an outsider, led rather than leading, and that in the eyes of many royalists and many global outlets, that perception has hardened into something permanent. Most striking of all, he is said to have cautioned that by ignoring Harry completely, treating him with total indifference, the royal family is handing Harry and Meghan an open microphone, letting them dominate the global story unchecked, while traditional royal values are mocked and dismantled in real time. Read that again. Diana's brother, the man who once stood at her funeral and confronted the Windsors to their faces, is now reportedly urging the future king to defend the crown's image. If you ever wanted a single sentence to measure how thoroughly Harry and Meghan have rearranged the loyalties of this family, there it is. So whose side is the public on? Because a fight like this never stays inside the family. And right now, there is a genuine global argument raging across social media, television panels, and international front pages. And it has divided opinion in a way that is anything but even. On one side stand those who back Prince William, and by extension, Charles Spencer. For them, refusing the Netflix documentary is a matter of respect and plain honor. Diana's story, they argue, has been told and retold, and turning her memory into yet another entertainment product risks trivializing the emotional weight of her death. The 30th anniversary, in this view, ought to be a moment of reflection within her family, not a marketing window with a premiere date. On the other side, gather Harry's defenders, and in fairness, their case deserves a proper hearing too. Diana shaped both of her sons equally, they argue, and Harry has every right to tell the story of his own mother. His perspective on grief, on media intrusion, on growing up inside that hurricane, offers a dimension of the historical record that nobody else alive can provide. And the sober truth, as ever, sits somewhere messier than either camp is willing to admit. Projects like this are put together by small armies of producers, historians, writers, and executives. Decisions about streaming content are rarely the whim of any single person. But before you pick your camp, try standing in both pairs of shoes. Imagine you are William, and the most painful event of your childhood is being scheduled as a content drop with a marketing plan by your own brother's production partners. Now imagine you are Harry, and you are being told that the story of your own mother, the woman whose hand you held through hospital wards and homeless shelters, is somehow not yours to tell. Both of those positions hurt. Both are human. That is what makes this saga so unbearable to watch. There is no villain inside that particular frame, only two sons and one grave. The villainy, if you want to locate it, lives in the commercial machinery wrapped around the grief. And in the world of celebrity and royalty, perception weighs as much as fact, where every leak and rumor instantly becomes another chapter in the saga of two warring brothers. And here is why the temperature runs so hot, why this is not merely another content dispute. Remember who we are actually talking about. Long before her sons ever became headlines, Diana had already made herself one of the most consequential figures the modern monarchy has ever produced, not through palaces, but through defiance. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, when fear and misinformation around HIV and AIDS were everywhere, when patients were stigmatized, abandoned, treated as outcasts, Diana walked into the wards and took their hands. She visited the hospitals, the orphanages, the care facilities. She worked tirelessly with organizations like the National AIDS Trust and the London Lighthouse, dragging global attention onto people the world would have preferred to forget. And, most tellingly for our story, she took William and Harry with her, to homeless shelters, to the hard edges of life beyond the palace gates, because she wanted her boys to grow into men who would spend their privilege on other people. That is the inheritance both brothers claim. That is the account everyone keeps trying to draw from. And that is why every documentary, book, and interview that touches her name sets off a national argument. Because for millions of people, Diana is not content. She is conscience. Which brings us, at last, to Harry, and to the state of the family he left behind. Their exit from royal duty was followed by the memoir Spare, the protocol-shattering book that became the fastest-selling nonfiction title of all time upon its release in January of 2023. A book in which Harry left no stone unturned, pouring out his contentious relationships with his father and his brother, and the conflagration his marriage had brought into royal life, before he shut the door on it altogether. The Sussexes have returned to the United Kingdom only a handful of times since, and now, according to a new report, the royal family is open to peace talks with Prince Harry, but remains extremely reluctant to reconcile with Meghan Markle. Just weeks after Harry sent his aides to London to meet with King Charles's communications secretary, it emerged that the core of the rift has not moved an inch. And according to insiders, it comes down to a single word: trust. There is none. On Meghan's 44th birthday of all days, A source spelled it out in the plainest terms yet. The royal family simply does not trust her. The monarch may be open to resolution with his son, but not, by these accounts, with his daughter-in-law. The same reporting suggests the future may see Harry traveling to and from the United Kingdom alone, without Meghan and without Archie and Lilibet, because the family's greatest fear, and I want you to let this sink all the way in, is that any private conversation they have with her becomes raw material for the next money-making venture she throws herself into. They are not afraid of her anger. They are afraid of her content calendar. Meanwhile, King Charles has maintained a stoic silence across the 5,459 miles separating him from his youngest son, even as Harry, to his credit, has reportedly offered to share his diary dates with the family. Full transparency. An offer extended even to William and Catherine, the Prince and Princess of Wales, who have not spoken to the Sussexes in years. So let us close the threads in order, exactly as promised. But first, the ledger. Because when you line up the withdrawals from the Diana account in a single column, the pattern becomes impossible to unsee. The ring at the wedding reception, the first borrowing, received warmly. Then the butterfly earrings, the Cartier tank watch, the gold bracelets, each one timed to a guaranteed photograph. 2021, the Oprah interview, the panorama architecture rebuilt to the rafters, lighting, framing, victim, and institution. Then the Netflix documentary series, the hunted couple fleeing the machine that destroyed Diana, her tragedy converted into their origin story. And finally, 2026, the request for the vault itself, the diaries, the home movies, Althorp as a film set, and the halo formally fitted to a new head. Watch the escalation. They began by borrowing her jewelry and ended by asking for her soul. Each withdrawal was larger than the last. Each was made without consulting the man who keeps the account. And the final one bounced. Of course it bounced. Thread 1. What was in the pitch? A 30th anniversary Diana documentary for 2027 that demanded Althorp, the private archives, the handwritten diaries, and the unseen home movies. Built to crown Meghan Markle as the 21st century Diana, pitched at the precise moment the Spotify deal had died, American Riviera Orchard was stalling, and the $100 million Netflix arrangement was expiring. Thread 2. Why the gatekeeper said no. Because Charles Spencer reportedly carries the guilt of having introduced his sister to Martin Bashir, watched her vulnerability turned into television through forged documents, and swore that no one, not a journalist, not a network, not a nephew, would ever harvest Diana's pain again. Thread 3. The letter. Far from siding with Harry, Diana's brother reportedly wrote to Prince William urging the future king to break his silence and defend the crown, because in his eyes, Harry is no longer the threat. The unchecked story is. And so the question I leave on your table is the one this entire saga has been asking from the start. Is it ever all right to spend Diana's legacy as currency, even by her own son? Was Charles Spencer right to slam the vault shut? Tell me below because I read everything, and I genuinely want to know where you land. But whatever you decide, carry this line out of here with you. Diana was exploited once by a man with forged documents, and her brother has decided she will not be exploited again by a man with a streaming deal. The vault at Althorp stays shut. The question is what a desperate Montecito does next, and whether Netflix walks away for good. The moment there is movement, you and I will be the first to talk about it. I am Royal Exposure. Until next time.